um, by reiterating, reminding the talks about something very specific. Everything that's said in the books always relates back to peace of mind, daily living. And I talk about peace of mind. Peace of mind is the unique form in which happiness, continuous basis, is available for the human being. So, happiness for the human being, happiness in this life, exists in a form that we're not at all looking for. In other words, we're convinced that happiness is available, but in the form of circumstance and pleasure. So humanity is seeking happiness in the form of pleasure, in the form of circumstance, in the form of gaining something that we don't have that will give us a feeling that we will call happiness. And so that Okay, we're back again. We'll start in just a minute or so. So, before I start most talks, I like to remind and reiterate that the talks are about something very specific, always. They're always about the same thing. So all of the concepts that are mentioned throughout the talks are relevant because they tie back into this topic of happiness for the human being. Happiness for the human being in this life, in daily life. And it's a continuous, unbroken happiness that is spoken about. It's a continuous, unbroken happiness that is available in this life. However, the happiness that is available on a continuous, unbroken basis is found in a form that we're not at all looking for. So, what that means is that the human being assumes that happiness is to be found in the form of pleasure, in the form of gaining something, in the form of outcomes, in the form of feeling good because of something received. The whole movement in life is towards gaining things that we don't have, in the belief that that is where happiness will be found. And there is a key concept in the teaching, and that key concept in the teaching is that happiness is not to be found in outcomes. Happiness is not to be found in the flow of life. The flow of life really refers to circumstance, the continually shifting circumstance that we find ourselves in daily life, at the shops, in the car, talking to a friend, listening to music, watching a movie, walking in the forest, listening to birds, watching birds, swimming. That's all circumstance. And circumstance is either pleasurable or painful, depending on the circumstance and how that circumstance is received, or how our body reacts to the circumstance. And the body, by the body I mean biological response of the body, primarily its preferences. So if a circumstance is in line with the body's biological preferences, it will be pleasurable. And if a circumstance is not in line with the body's biological preferences, then it will be painful. And in life, we can say that there are, making up our experience, generally two types of reactions to the circumstance. There is the biological reaction, which is on the level of the flow of life. And then there are our psychological reactions, which is on the level of our attitude to the flow of life. So we have the flow of life that is either pleasurable or painful, depending on the body's biological preference. And so the body is part of the circumstance, and so the circumstance is registered as either pleasure or pain. That is our biological reaction to the circumstance. And additional to the biological reaction, the human being has developed in such a way that it has another response to life, and that is the psychological reaction. That is the attitude to the circumstance. And what is the attitude that gets put in place? What is the basis of the attitude that gets put in place by life from as we develop? The general attitude towards what is happening, the general attitude towards the unfolding of the flow of life, is the attitude of personal doership. and the attitude of attachment to outcomes. And that attitude stems from essentially the deeply ingrained belief, assumption, way of interpreting life that says, I am the orchestrator, the one in control, in charge of everything that I say, think, feel, and do. And the I, the me that is meant to be in charge is an imagined aspect of the human being that actually doesn't exist, but is believed to exist. And so the belief that it exists is the false identity. There is a thought and a movement in the body that says, I did that. And that I is a thought-based I. But it's deeply, deeply ingrained into the human structure. And what that I is doing is it's claiming ownership over actions and movements that have happened because of a design that is forcing certain actions and movements to take place. So an easy example to demonstrate this point is that the heart pumps, and it does it without the part of ourself that feels like it's the orchestrator, without that orchestrator needing to do the pumping of the heart. And when it comes to the pumping of the heart, there's no part in our conscious experience that correlates with the pumping of the heart. There's no thinking or any other movement that correlates with pumping of the heart. So we don't get a sense that I am doing that. Actually, it's very clear that it's on autopilot. It's just happening. The heart is pumping. And so the psychological me doesn't claim ownership over that function. It doesn't claim ownership over the function of the kidneys, the function of so many other organs in the body. It doesn't claim ownership over the immune system, because it's very clear that we have no idea how to make that happen. However, there's a large range of other processes that fall into this gray area, and they are processes that are happening as automatically as the pumping of the heart and the working of the liver and the kidneys. And however, there is a sense that there is a me controlling some of these other functions, like thought, like speaking, like the physical outward movements of the body. There is a sense that there is someone doing that. And because there's a sense of someone doing those activities, those functions, then the assumption is that because that's how it feels, that that's what's going on. There is a I speaking. And when I speak, it's because the I that is in control and in charge has done the speaking. And when we dive in deeper and deeper, we start to see that the speaking is happening as a result of the existence of a body and a brain, and that body and brain have grown from conception. They grew according to some blueprint, some plan, some instructions that were there before me. So how can the me claim ownership over what has developed, what has grown? And yet it does. Or at least it ignores the fact that the body has grown according to a design, according to a blueprint, and is functioning according to that design. And it says, oh, I am responsible for all of the functions of the body. And as well, when I say all of the functions, the ones that it feels like it's responsible for. And the truth is that those movements happen because of the body and its design. If you start regressing the body backwards in time, and we know that the body changes as we go forward in time. If you went backward in time, the body is going to be reversing backward, and the capacities of the body change. So as the body gets smaller, our muscles and our strength becomes less developed. So as children, we're less strong than as young adults. And we have to acknowledge that it's not only the physical structure, but also the conditioning of life that add to who we are, to our design, our makeup. And so if we were to go back in time, we would see that the capacities of the body sort of diminish. And so where we are now, the body has its capacities, and they're a result of everything that came before. And there is no me doer that is independent of that growing process. And essentially we can look at the growth process as and who we are in each moment as a result of our genetic structure and our up-to-date conditioning. And the me and all the other thinking, so the me doesn't refer to the functional thinking. The functional thinking is the working mind. And the me doer, the me that feels like it is in control, is what we would call the psychological identity. In this teaching, it's referred to as the thinking mind. And at the base of that psychological identity is the belief I am the doer, and that my completeness and my happiness is to be found in outcomes, which means the belief that my happiness is to be found in pleasure. And this teaching is trying to point out that the psychological identity has got life pretty much wrong. And there really isn't a psychological identity that has got life wrong of its own volition. There is a psychological identity that has been formed because it just that's how we tend to evolve, how we tend to develop. Part of the growing process is just like when we're exposed to language that other people are speaking. Eventually we learn, because of that new conditioning happening moment after moment after moment, we then start speaking. And in the same way, because of the way the experience of life is received, the belief in personal doership gets ingrained. And so then that human being has had inserted into their structure this psychological me that essentially has no idea about what it really is and interprets life incorrectly because it's designed to interpret life incorrectly. And so this teaching is essentially giving us some hints about what's wrong and what's right as far as the interpretation of life goes, especially in relation to the topic of happiness for the human being. Our happiness is not to be found in outcomes. That's one of the key concepts in teaching. Your happiness is not to be found in outcomes. And if that becomes part of our working mind, information that is delivered, so the satsangs, the talks, are just life's way of delivering new conditioning. And that new conditioning becomes part of your up-to-date conditioning. Remember, the human being in each moment is a result of their genes, meaning how the body has grown up to this point in time, and all of the new conditioning that has been delivered moment after moment after moment. And as a cumulative effect, we call that the up-to-date conditioning that coexists with the genetic structure. And the genetic structure expresses itself as your totality, as all the physical aspects, the color of your eyes, how your hair grows, even your brain structure, your levels of intelligence. All of that is a result of the genetic structure and how that genetic structure has been impacted by life. And they're not really two. We describe them as genes and up-to-date conditioning. So they're two concepts. But really there is one biological entity that is a result of both those factors. So happiness isn't to be found in the flow of life if that becomes part of your up-to-date conditioning. When we find ourselves in daily life, which is whenever we're awake, we're in daily life, and the psychological me that believes that its happiness is to be found, or its completeness is to be found in life somehow magically being pleasure, 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 always turning out exactly as we expect it, or we would hope it to be. If that happens and it creates one of the forms of suffering, which it's bound to do, expectation, guilt, blame, pride, worry, then because happiness is peace of mind, not a circumstantial outcome, and peace of mind is the absence of suffering, we might then start to become more and more aware of the suffering when it arises. And the suffering is always to be found in your attitude to the flow of life. And what is the attitude that is referred to as the thinking mind or suffering? It's the attitude of personal doership and attachment to outcome. And so when we see that attitude arising of blame, of expectation, of resistance to the present moment, the way it is, and we realize that that is an uncomfortableness with oneself, an uncomfortableness with the other. And it's that uncomfortableness that disturbs the peace of mind that is there if the uncomfortableness isn't there. And the uncomfortableness is quite ingrained. So it's not only there when we are commenting directly on the circumstance. It's also there in a ongoing subtle form. because we're so convinced that we are this identity that is incomplete and looking for completion. And if we see that this movement is happening, a movement that is believing in circumstance being the solution, circumstance at some future point in time, the thought can arise, my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. And that thought is particularly powerful if it acts like a sword slicing through the horizontal thinking and brings us back into a state of being, a state of coming back in touch with the ingrained sense of I am, I exist, which is the essence of the human being. And that's easier said than done. Human beings have lost touch with this essence. And so it takes teachings, spiritual teachings, to remind us that what we are is, well, the way that we're reminded is varied, and often we're told we're not the body, we're not our thoughts, we're not our feelings, because in losing touch with this more pure, you could say, more fundamental aspect of the human being, when we lose touch with that, we became identified, fully involved in the gross aspects of the human being, in the actions and the thinking and the emotions. And in becoming heavily identified with those movements, we know ourselves as that. And so teachings are often trying to remind us that there is an essence, there is something that is fundamental to the experience of life that has been forgotten and overlooked. And we're often being pointed inward. We're given all sorts of descriptions that help maybe allow for a recognition to happen, allow a recognition of the aspect that is being pointed at, the component of the human being is being pointed at. So awareness or consciousness is a word that is used to describe what we truly are. Now, when I say what we truly are, really, some teachings will say what you truly are is not the body, you are consciousness. And the reason that it's described that way is to create a contrast between that we're very aware of and that which we're not at all aware of. And so if we call that the truth, and if we call the body illusion or what we're not, that can be quite powerful for a seeker. It can be a very powerful teaching that labels that which has been overlooked as truth and that which has been heavily identified with, overly valued, as illusion. This is good. It's not the absolute truth, but it's a powerful methodology. Because at a certain point, some people say, oh, I want the truth. I don't want to be stuck in error or ignorance or illusion. And so a teaching that says, you've forgotten what you truly are. You're lost in illusion, identifying with what is not real. is powerful to redirect attention. So awareness is described as not something, not an object. The body is an object. So what we really are, awareness or consciousness, is not that. The body is known by that which we are, is aware, is recognized, along with the whole experience of daily life. It is, when we're doing this exploration, it is not the body that is aware of the other objects in daily life. That's how it feels. That's what we've always assumed, that it is the body that is aware of the chairs and the table, and the other people and the trees. But rather it's this fundamental essence that is ever present, always here whenever daily life experience is here. Without it, the whole experience of life would be absent, would collapse. And because the body is very much, until we start meditating and exploring internal states, when we're living life basically looking outwardly, the body is always in the experience. And so the assumption is, oh, the body is common and it is what is here whenever I see anything, whatever the moment happens to be. And so the assumption is, oh, it is the body that is aware of everything that is happening. And that's part of the error. We have become identified with being the body. So it means that we assume that the body is the subject. And what's being pointed out here is, no, the body is an object, just like the table and the chairs. And the subject is here, but it's been overlooked. It has been mistaken for years and years and years. The body, which is an object, has been assumed to be the subject. So what is the subject if it's not the body? The body is an object. The subject is prior to the body. The subject is before the body, is more fundamental in the experience than the body. The body is an object. And I invite anyone listening to stop thinking about what is said. Just bring your attention to the experience, the visual experience, and notice if you're able to open up the vista that all of the experience, including the body, fits into this field of awareness. Allow the center of consciousness to drift down into the heart, as if it's dragged down by gravity. And at the same time as feeling the center of consciousness drift down from the head to the heart, allow the whole experience to be known. And there needs not be any thinking about the experience in order for it to be known. Thinking about life has become a habit, and dare I say, it's an obsessive habit. So it is valid to stop regularly throughout the day and see if it's possible to be in the present moment without the need to think about what's going on, without the need to label or judge, without the need to be thinking about the past or the future. The happiness that's available in this life is happiness through peace of mind. And peace of mind is the absence of the thinking mind. And the absence of the thinking mind is not going to be found through obsessive thinking. It's found when we reconnect, when we stop often. So stopping doesn't necessarily need you to stop walking down the street. It doesn't need you to stand still on a physical level. It just refers to a stopping of a thinking about the past and the future and a thinking about the present with complaints and judgment. And that stopping really means being present with what is, the circumstance, the visuals, the sound, the smells, the sense of touch. And at the core of that multi-sensory experience, there is this undeniable sense of existence. So if your eyes close and the daily life experience suddenly changes radically from being an experience of a world of form and time and space, a world of daily living. And if we are present with what is, instead of holding on to a residual self-image of who you are as the body in a world of form, if we bring attention to the closed eye space, we can even drop the notion that this is the closed eye space, because as we bring attention in there, we find this vast open space, and unless we are thinking about eyes, there are no eyes, there is no body, no physical body. So that's just an example of how I'm sure many can see how we drag a residual self-image into meditation. And you could potentially spend 20 or 30 minutes till the alarm goes off if you're sitting in meditation with the sense that you are a body sitting in meditation in a room, instead of attention becoming immersed in the new experience, which is an experience where the world of space and time and form ceases to exist. Now, I'm not insisting that there is no external world, but it's the experience of the external world that is important. It is about being present with the experience as it is. And if we can start to appreciate that all we ever have, whether we're in meditation or in daily life, is a momentary experience, an experience of whatever. And so when we stop, we're essentially coming back and appreciating the experience with all of its depth. And when I'm talking about depth of experience, I'm not really talking about appreciating the wonderful colors and the birds. We can do that, but the real depth that can be appreciated in the momentary experience is the depth of the beingness and the awareness that are fundamental to experience. They are what experience is dependent on. And so dropping into the present moment really means dropping into that layer that is below the thinking, below the content, and appreciating that all of the content arises within this background of awareness and beingness. So abide in I am. Nisargadatta Maharaj has been known to say on occasion that he had such trust in his guru. He was a bhakti. Nisargadatta started off as a bhakti yogi. And his guru said, abide in I am. That was the instruction. And so Nisargadatta said, my guru gave that instruction, so I followed it. Abiding in I am happened, and after 4 years, I think he said, self-realization happened. Now we might think, oh my God, so I have to sit for 4 years in I am. It's not that daunting. Abide in I am just means remember as often as possible, whenever remembering happens, to drop into your essence. to drop out of the thinking mind, out of guilt and blame and worry and expectation, out of judgment. In order for that to happen, deep down in our system, there needs to be a recognition and appreciation that happiness is not to be found in outcomes. All of the guilt and blame and worry and expectation is a thinking about outcomes, those that have happened or those that might happen. And so the thought, my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes, can be the sword after the recognition that I'm thinking about outcomes. That thought can arise and bring us back into abiding in I am. So my interpretation of Nisargadatta's after 4 years of abiding in I am means that at first he was able to drop into being for relatively short periods of time, relatively infrequently. But his guru's instruction, abide in I am, remained with him, which meant that often he would remember, oh, abide in I am. Be that which is prior to thinking, prior to the body. Now, at some point, we might really see that what we are is a human being that has a physical form and it's got an essence. And so what we are is the human being. We can't be prior to the human being. We can't be prior to the body. We are a human being, and that human being has the capacity to rest, to just be. That's one of the modes, you could say, of the human being when that mode is developed. And one of the ways that that mode gets developed for the human being to be able to rest, to drop out of involvement in circumstance, to know that it's not really important, to reconnect to themselves. One of the ways that that mode gets strengthened is by a teaching telling us that you are not the body, you are that which is prior to the body, that which is aware of the body. So I throw that in because I feel spirituality seeking needs to go beyond sometimes, beyond certain types of teaching, where we can actually give explanations about what is really going on. Sometimes giving an explanation is counterproductive. Let's just say what does the job. And I value that. It's needed sometimes. And then putting another explanation on top of that, especially if someone has spent a lot of time immersed in the teaching that says we'll just say what needs to be said in order to bring about the change. After that has started to happen, in fact, if it's done a lot of its work, the new description can add and take us maybe beyond what the very valuable pointer that got us to that point is capable of taking us to. So essentially what I'm saying is we are a human being, and the human being experiences life. And in experiencing life, there is life with the experience of a human being in it. And the human being is either one where the thinking mind is creating an uncomfortableness with life, or there's this other mode where that thinking mind is seen to be taking us down the garden path, and a dropping out happens more and more often. Now remember, we're not the doers of the dropping out. The dropping out happens just like the suffering happens. And so if you find yourself suffering and unable to drop out, understand that this is not satsang that says you, the doer, must abide in I am. It's just a description of one way that life can unfold, and that description may induce a dropping into I am, and it may not. If the suffering tendency is strong, dropping into I am is maybe not going to happen just yet. And if we can surrender to the fact that it's not destined to happen just yet, there can be a surrender to the suffering that is here. If it's understandable, if life becomes understandable, then a resistance falls away. So if we understand that suffering is a result of our genes and up-to-date conditioning, like all the other functions of the body. Now, our up-to-date conditioning can change, and the suffering can fall away if life delivers the right combination of new conditioning and circumstance. However, even though it can change, even though the suffering can fall away, it may not be destined for that to happen for some time. Or it may be destined for there to be intermittent suffering, and then peace of mind, and then suffering, and then peace of mind. And so if we understand that that's life, then when it's happening, and if it's understandable, there's less resistance to it. So if a friend of yours hurts you, from an objective point of view, we can understand that everyone is going to act based on their preferences and their desires and essentially their genes and up-to-date conditioning. And even a best friend can do something that hurts us. Now, it's not our preference, but the fact is that we can't expect people to do what we would like all of the time. Now, we might be disappointed that our friend has hurt us, but if we can understand that people are driven by all sorts of thoughts and assessments of what's best at the time, driven by feelings of uncomfortableness, feelings of, all sorts of impulses, then at least it's understandable that a friend can hurt us, because that's how life moved them. And that's part of what the teaching is trying to emphasize over and over, that life is going to unfold one way, sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. That the other is not the doer, you are not the doer. So essentially, from an attitudinal point, we can life as a predetermined story. Everyone is following the script of life, the universal script. And if your friend hurts you, you can look at it as your destiny. It was predetermined as part of your destiny for your friend to deliver pain. They were the vehicle through which life has delivered your destined pain. You know, all of your destined amount of pleasure and pain has already been decided. And each moment your destined pleasure or pain is being delivered. Now, the thinking mind doesn't think about life that way. The thinking mind says, my friend should never hurt me. It has all sorts of reasonings and rationales. It says, we sat down and we had a long chat. Before we become best friends, we always have to stand up for each other. Is it agreed? Yes, it's agreed. Okay, we can be best friends. And so the thinking mind says, now we have decided, that's it. We are in control. And I say, well, that might not be destiny. And we think that because we have decided, because we've made an agreement, then that's how the future will turn out. Expect the unexpected. It's little things like starting to remind ourselves that life isn't broken when pain is delivered. Like that this is life. It has the ability to cut off the suffering that would have been the path down which we travel if life hasn't delivered this new conditioning that says, yes, life will deliver pain. Your best friend will hurt you sometimes. If life hasn't delivered that new conditioning, then when that happens, it's not understandable. And if it's not understandable, it's going to be resisted. So, innocent children are born handicapped. It's not fair, but it's part of life. Life is duality, interconnected opposites. There is health and disease. Children of good health and children of ill health. I'm not saying this because I'm saying that this is great. I'm just saying that that's how life is. And if we can come to see life as it is more, then it becomes more and more understandable. If you were in a traumatic situation when you were young, that situation will have left its memory, its imprint. And if you find yourself being afraid in a situation that mimics something that was traumatic in the past, then that's understandable. It may not be preferable. It may not be useful. It may be a hindrance. It may feel very uncomfortable, but it's understandable. And we're always trying to resist the things that are not ideal, because we're convinced that our happiness is to be found in pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Happiness is to be found in the dissolving of the thinking mind. Happiness is to be found in a surrender, in an acceptance. And surrender and acceptance are the absence, the falling away of non-acceptance, the falling away of resistance. And that happens when we abide in I am, abide in the undeniable sense of existence, and allow life to be what it is. Sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain.